I think this new General Hospital promo for the week of May 11th to 15th is setting up one of those classic chaos-filled sweeps weeks where every storyline suddenly collides at once. To me, the most interesting part is that almost every character in this preview looks either terrified, guilty, or completely cornered. The promo opens with the fallout from the car crash storyline, and honestly, I was wondering how long it would take before suspicions started landing on Isaiah Gannon. When he tells Portia Robinson that ADA Justine Turner believes he may have been involved in Jordan Ashford's accident, the whole situation suddenly feels much bigger than a random collision. What really caught my attention was seeing Jordan and Curtis Ashford showing up at Portia's door together. That tells me this confrontation is probably going to get deeply personal very fast. I may be wrong, but it feels like the show is positioning Isaiah as either a convenient suspect or someone hiding a detail that could completely change the story. Then the promo abruptly shifts into emotional territory, with Rocco Falconeri hugging a brunette woman. At first glance, it almost looks like the show could be teasing some emotional closure connected to Britt Westbourne, even though that would definitely raise questions, considering Britt's history on the series. Soap promos love misleading edits, so I'm not fully convinced yet, but the scene clearly hints at reconciliation or forgiveness. The bigger shock comes from Lulu Spencer finally confessing to Dante Falconeri that Rocco was the one who shot Ross Cullum. Dante's reaction says everything. His immediate, "Why wouldn't you tell me?" feels less like anger and more like betrayal mixed with panic. To me, this is one of those moments where secrets become more damaging than the original crime itself. Meanwhile, the entire situation involving Jack Brennan, Nina Reeves, Valentine Cassadine, and Drew Kane has become unbelievably messy. I didn't realize until this preview how dangerous that medication mix-up could become. Nina accidentally injecting Brennan instead of Drew may have completely changed the power balance of this storyline. Brennan lying unconscious in the hospital while Drew suddenly becomes more alert feels like the beginning of a massive reversal. And honestly, Drew holding a phone may be the most important image in the entire promo. For weeks, Drew has basically been trapped in that horrifying paralysis state, dependent on injections to keep him immobilized. Now, because of the delay in his medication, he's suddenly conscious enough to act. I think the 911 call could completely expose everything if Drew manages to explain what happened before somebody stops him. At the same time, I keep thinking Nina is about to spiral into full panic mode. Even if Brennan survives, how does she explain why the WSB director suddenly ended up in the exact same condition Drew was suffering from? There's almost no believable explanation that wouldn't raise suspicion immediately. Then the promo closes with Jen Sidwell ominously declaring, "We have a mess on our hands," right before cutting to terrified looks from Willow and Nina at the hospital. That final sequence makes me think the show is tying all these stories together into one major fallout event. To me, Willow's fear suggests she may finally realize just how dangerous the people around her have become. And whenever Sidwell starts talking calmly about a mess, it usually means things are about to get far worse. Overall, this promo feels very different from a standard weekly tease. I think the writers are setting up multiple truths exploding at the same time. Hidden shootings, accidental poisonings, possible cover-ups, and Drew potentially regaining enough awareness to expose everyone involved. If even half these secrets come out this week, Port Charles is about to implode. I think this storyline is setting up one of the ugliest mother-daughter betrayals we've seen in a long time on General Hospital. And honestly, Nina may have just destroyed herself trying to protect Willow. What really stands out to me is how fast the situation spiraled the second Nina failed at the one task Willow trusted her with. Willow handed her a simple assignment: keep Drew sedated and locked in. Instead, Nina panicked. Brennan got injected. Valentine nearly turned the whole thing into a murder scene. and now the entire operation is unraveling.
The irony here is brutal. Nina crossed every moral line possible because she was terrified of losing Willow again. But in doing so, she may have guaranteed exactly that outcome. I also can't ignore how dangerous Willow has become in this storyline. Maybe I'm wrong, but she no longer feels conflicted or emotionally torn the way she once did. She's calculating now. Everything is about survival, image control, and protecting her political future. That changes the dynamic completely. Once Drew starts recovering enough to call 911, the dominoes start falling. Even if his intention is exposing Willow and Nina, the immediate consequence is Brennan ending up hospitalized after being injected with the same medication. That creates evidence, real evidence. And evidence is exactly what Willow will use to save herself. The biggest red flag for Nina is that Willow already has the perfect scapegoat standing right in front of her. Nina handled the syringe. Nina injected Brennan. Nina was physically present during the chaos. And if fingerprints become part of the investigation, Willow can distance herself almost instantly. To me, this feels less like a will Willow betray Nina story, and more like, when does Willow decide sacrificing Nina becomes necessary? That's what makes Sidwell such an important factor here too. Jen Sidwell raging about a mess on our hands tells me the pressure is about to intensify from every direction. Willow isn't only worried about Michael Corinthos reclaiming custody of the kids. She's also trying to survive politically while staying useful to dangerous people. And when characters on soaps start balancing family loyalty against power and self-preservation, family loyalty usually loses. I was also thinking about how tragic Nina's position really is here. She keeps convincing herself that helping Willow will preserve their bond, but she's enabling increasingly horrifying behavior instead of confronting it. Nina wants to be chosen by her daughter so badly that she keeps participating in schemes that make Willow worse. The saddest part may be that Nina probably still believes Willow would protect her in return. I don't think that happens. If investigators connect the medication to both Drew Kane and Jack Brennan, Willow has every incentive to present Nina as the unstable one who acted alone in a panic. Whether that idea comes from Willow herself or from Sidwell almost doesn't matter. The outcome is the same. And if this theory plays out, I could absolutely see Willow publicly distancing herself from Nina again, maybe even acting horrified by her mother's actions, while privately knowing she orchestrated the entire cover-up. That kind of betrayal feels very soap opera perfect. Nina loses everything not because of an enemy, but because she refused to see what her own daughter had become. I think Monday's episode of General Hospital is shaping up to be one of those chaos-heavy installments where almost every storyline feels ready to explode at the same time. To me, the biggest tension is clearly around Drew Kane, finally showing signs that the paralysis is wearing off. After being trapped for what feels like forever, even just wiggling his fingers probably gives him hope that he can reclaim control of his life again. But I don't think this is going to be some easy escape. The moment Willow Kane walks back into that house, everything could change. If she realizes Drew is regaining movement, I can absolutely see panic taking over. And honestly, that's what makes this storyline interesting to me. Willow keeps getting pushed deeper into morally dangerous territory. At first, it felt like she was just caught in impossible circumstances, but now it seems like every decision drags her further into complicity. Meanwhile, Nina Reeves injecting Jack Brennan with Drew's syringe out of desperation feels like one of those classic soap moments where somebody makes a split-second choice that creates 10 new disasters. I was wondering if Nina even knows exactly how bad this could get. Brennan collapsing on the floor while Valentine Cassadine starts questioning her already sounds like the beginning of another dangerous alliance. And honestly, Valentine holding all the power in that situation makes me nervous. He's unpredictable enough on his own, but now he potentially has leverage over both Nina and Willow.
That's the kind of setup soaps love because it guarantees secrets, manipulation, and eventually betrayal. The Sonny Corinthos and Rick Lansing confrontation also sounds intense. Sonny holding Rick at gunpoint immediately raises the stakes, but I have a feeling Rick's explanation about the shady Ava situation may not be completely fake. If the secret art gift for Liz angle turns out to be true, that would be such a strange but very Rick-style twist. He always operates in that gray area where nobody fully trusts him, even when he's technically telling the truth. I also think Elizabeth Baldwin is becoming one of the quiet MVPs of this storyline. Dante learning the truth because of Liz instead of Lulu could create serious emotional fallout. From Dante's perspective, I can understand why he'd feel betrayed that Lulu Spencer hid something this huge involving Rocco Falconeri and Ross Cullum. What really caught my attention was the mention of Nathan West actually being Cassius Faison and helping cover things up. That adds another layer of deception that could completely shatter Dante's trust in everyone around him. I may be wrong, but this feels like the kind of reveal that could permanently damage relationships instead of leading to a quick reconciliation. Then there's Charlotte Cassadine. Carly warning Charlotte that there are rules she cannot break almost guarantees Charlotte is about to do exactly that. That's just how these scenes usually work in soaps. The more adults try to control Charlotte, the more she tends to act out impulsively. And with Valentine absent while chaos unfolds elsewhere, Charlotte could easily become a wild card factor in the larger story. I also found the Harrison Chase and Willow scene interesting because it briefly gives the episode some emotional breathing room before everything crashes again. Chase wanting to adopt Phoebe with Brooklyn Quartermain sounds genuinely heartfelt, but the contrast is wild. Willow is smiling through normal conversations while secretly living inside a complete nightmare at home. To me, that's the strongest part of this whole spoiler setup. Almost every character is balancing two realities at once: public normalcy and private disaster. And in true General Hospital fashion, it feels like those worlds are about to collide hard. I honestly think this is one of those rare General Hospital fight scenes where you could feel how exhausted everyone probably was by the end of filming. The chaos between Jocelyn and Cassius did not have that usual polished soap opera softness to it. It looked rough, clumsy, desperate, and honestly kind of painful, which is probably why it worked so well. What stood out to me most from Eden McCoy's comments was how much pride she seemed to take in the physicality of the scene. She described it as the craziest, most choreographed fight scene she has ever done, and I completely believe that. Daytime television usually moves at such a fast pace that you do not always expect this level of stunt coordination, but this fight genuinely felt like everyone involved went all in. I also think it says a lot that McCoy emphasized how organized the set was, despite the violence on screen. When a sequence looks that messy and uncontrolled, it usually means the choreography behind the scenes was incredibly tight. Otherwise, somebody absolutely would have ended up injured. Her praise for stunt performers Matt Mullins and Heather Leah Bonomo made that even clearer. To me, those stunt doubles deserve a huge amount of credit because the scene had weight to it in a way soap fights often do not. The fact that rehearsals and filming happened on the same day honestly surprised me. Watching the finished result, I would have assumed they spent several days refining every movement. Instead, it sounds like the cast and crew just threw themselves into it, with preparation, adrenaline, and probably a concerning amount of floor bruises. McCoy wanting to perform as much of the fight herself as possible also explains why the scene felt so convincing. I think audiences can usually tell when actors are heavily doubled during action scenes. Here, Joss looked panicked, frantic, and exhausted in a very believable way, because McCoy was physically involved in so much of it herself. There was nothing overly glamorous about the fight either. Joss was slipping, scrambling, getting thrown around, and basically surviving on instinct. At the same time, McCoy was smart enough to know where the professionals needed to step in. The body slams and hard floor impacts apparently went to Heather Leah Bonimo, which honestly makes sense because some of those hits looked brutal enough to make viewers instinctively wince. I was actually wondering while watching how much of that McCoy was doing herself, because a few moments looked far harsher than what soaps normally attempt. Then there is the Ryan Pavey detail, which genuinely sounded like something said moments before a medic appears off camera. Apparently, he told McCoy she could actually punch me in the face for real, which feels both committed and deeply concerning at the same time. McCoy immediately shutting that idea down with a laughing, "No thanks," may have been the most responsible decision made during the entire production. I may be wrong, but I think this fight scene worked because it never felt overly cinematic or too clean. It felt ugly in the exact way a real struggle should. Furniture was flying, people were crashing into walls, punches looked awkward instead of elegant, and everyone seemed genuinely exhausted by the end of it. That realism gave the confrontation far more tension than the average soap fight, where somebody gets shoved once and dramatically falls over a coffee table. To me, this was one of the better examples of General Hospital pushing beyond the normal daytime formula and actually delivering something memorable. And judging from McCoy's reaction afterward, it sounds like the cast had almost as much fun making the chaos as viewers had watching it unfold. I think it's interesting how Giovani Matza keeps blurring the line between fiction and real-life performance in a way that almost feels like an extension of his character, rather than something separate from it. To me, watching him step onto the court at Rocket Arena in Cleveland on May 9th during a Cavaliers playoff game didn't just feel like a celebrity cameo. It felt like Gio Palmieri briefly stepping out of Port Charles and into a different kind of spotlight. I was wondering while watching the fan videos how intentional that Michael Jackson tribute really is as part of his stage identity. He performed Smooth Criminal again, just like he did earlier at a Los Angeles Lakers game on April 21st. There's something deliberate about repeating that motif. Maybe it's not just a performance choice, but a way of grounding his public image in something recognizable, almost cinematic. To me, the moment becomes even more layered when I think about how he wasn't just performing alone at center court. The Cavaliers' Scream team joining in adds a kind of crossover energy, sports entertainment meeting musical performance, almost like daytime drama spilling into a live arena event. Even their shared moonwalk practice clips on social media feel like part of a larger spectacle building around him. I didn't realize how much audience engagement was happening around it until I saw reactions online. Comments from fans like Kindsky25 expressing intense admiration, or KMBEV60 reacting to the surprise appearance at a home game, show how quickly these moments become shared cultural experiences. Even actors connected to him on screen, like Dominic Zampronia and Rena Sofer, interacting through social media likes adds another layer of blurred reality between General Hospital and the real world. From a storytelling perspective, what stands out to me is how closely Giovani Matza's real violin skills are tied to his character, Gio Palmieri. It's rare that a soap opera character's core identity is so directly reinforced by the actor's actual talent. The 2025 Nurses' Ball performance, where Gio played a medley on stage, felt like a peak moment, until the narrative took a sharp emotional turn with him destroying his violin after the revelation about his biological parents, Brooklyn and Dante Falconeri. That act wasn't just dramatic, it felt symbolic, like the breaking of identity itself. Since then, the writing has kept Gio in this uncertain, emotional space. I think the show has been deliberately cautious with him, letting him drift rather than rush his arc. We've seen him only briefly reconnect with music, like that Christmas moment at the Quartermain house when he unknowingly played a gifted violin from his grandfather's Sonny Corinthos and Ned Quartermain, discovered by Leo Quartermain. It wasn't framed as a triumphant return. It was almost accidental, which says a lot about where the character emotionally is. I was also struck by how his return to performance has shifted into something more collaborative and less pressured. Playing guitar at the reopening of Charlie's Pub alongside Trina Robinson and Jacinda felt like a softer re-entry into music. Even more telling is the Broadway reference, his brief orchestra experience, and the encouragement from Michael James Scott suggests the show is quietly expanding his artistic world, rather than locking him into violin alone. Now, with Trina saying she only feels comfortable singing when Gio accompanies her, I think the writers are setting up something interesting. Not necessarily fame-driven, but emotionally dependent performance dynamics. Whether that leads toward a new nurses' ball or simply strengthens their creative bond is still unclear. It could easily become a storyline where music is less about ambition and more about connection, especially as Kai Taylor and Willow Tate remain entangled in their own complications. I think what makes this arc intriguing is that it doesn't fully commit to any one direction yet. Maybe Gio and Trina become a musical partnership that reshapes their relationships. Or maybe it quietly builds toward another major stage moment where Gio finally reclaims the violin in a way that feels like closure rather than conflict. Either way, I get the sense that the show is slowly positioning him for something bigger. And watching Giovani Matza carry that same energy outside the studio, on NBA courts, in live performances, in viral clips, makes the line between character and performer feel thinner than ever. On General Hospital, I've been thinking about how quickly the situation around Jen Sidwell and Jack Brennan is spiraling into something far more controlled and far more disturbing than it first appeared. I think what stood out to me most is how Sidwell is being positioned almost like a quiet architect behind the chaos. The idea that he may already be tied to the drug operation affecting Willow Kane, and the way it's leaving someone like Drew in a paralyzed, unresponsive condition, starts to feel less like coincidence and more like a pattern. And once I started connecting that to Brennan's collapse, I couldn't ignore the possibility that the same solution might be reused on him. What really changes the tone of everything is the timing of Nina Reeves accidentally stabbing Brennan while trying to intervene in the violent clash involving Valentine Cassadine. In that moment, everything overlaps: panic, misinformation, and misdirected intent. Nina was meant to handle something entirely different involving Drew's medication, but Brennan's sudden arrival, followed by Valentine's confrontation, pulls her into a situation she clearly wasn't prepared to control. To me, the most unsettling part is the aftermath. Brennan now in a hospital bed, surrounded by uncertainty, and possibly already being framed by symptoms that mimic a stroke. I think that's where the story gets especially dangerous, because when a condition looks medically explainable on the surface, it becomes very easy for others to stop questioning it. And Brennan, unlike most major players in Port Charles, doesn't really have a safety net there. No clear family presence, no consistent ally stepping forward to challenge what's happening. That absence alone creates space for everything to be quietly redirected. Even Carly Spencer's emotional distance, still tied to resentment over the WSB recruitment involving Jocelyn Jacks, means one less voice willing to push back or demand answers. I also keep thinking about Ross Cullum and the way Sidwell seems to be operating through indirect control. If Cullum is the one managing the official response, and Sidwell is feeding him a version of events that serves their interests, then Brennan's condition stops being a medical mystery and starts looking like containment. The idea that he could be left in a locked-in state, fully aware but completely unable to move, feels less like random tragedy and more like strategic silence. Sidwell's own line in the preview, mentioning a mess on our hands, adds to that tension. I think it could easily be interpreted as damage control, not concern, especially if Brennan has been digging into César Faison's final project, something that clearly connects multiple dangerous interests together. If that investigation was threatening to expose too much, then removing Brennan as an active force suddenly becomes very convenient. What I keep coming back to is this uncomfortable possibility that Brennan's condition may not just be something to be cured, but something others might prefer to maintain. Because once he's out of the way, silent, immobile, and medically explained, there's no resistance left to interrupt what Sidwell and his allies are trying to complete. And still, I can't help but wonder if that's the full picture, or just the darkest version of it. Soap narratives like General Hospital often leave just enough space for reversal, for hidden intervention, or for a truth that hasn't surfaced yet. If Brennan does wake up to a controlled and manipulated reality, the real question becomes not just who did this, but who will risk exposing it when silence has already been built into the system itself. I think what stands out most in this moment is how the storyline of General Hospital and the real life of Eden McCoy seem to briefly echo each other in an unexpected way. On screen, her character Jocelyn is caught in intense, life-threatening chaos after Cassius drags her into one of the show's more violent and emotionally heavy conflicts in recent memory on General Hospital. But off-screen, the energy shifts completely into something quiet, reflective, and deeply human. To me, Eden McCoy's Mother's Day post doesn't feel like a performance or publicity moment at all. It reads more like someone gently opening a private box of memories she may not have fully realized she was still carrying. She shared old photos of handwritten notes and printed messages left by her mother, small fragments of care that were once everyday gestures, but now feel almost like preserved conversations. I was struck by how she described not even fully remembering where the notes used to be hidden, maybe in lunch bags, maybe in her room, maybe in places that only a mother thinks to leave love behind. She called them incredible words written by incredible people that were given to me by an incredible mother, which feels like her trying to hold on to something that is both ordinary and irreplaceable at the same time. Looking at the messages she shared, there's a quiet emotional weight in them. One note described itself as, "My arms around you for a brief moment," which honestly feels like a mother trying to extend physical comfort through paper and ink. Another included an A.A. Milne reflection on friendship and separation, paired with a simple, "I love you so much, so proud of you." I think what makes it hit harder is that these aren't grand declarations. They're intimate, everyday reminders of presence. There's also that familiar quote about thoughts becoming words and actions, and how people may forget what was said, but never forget how they were made to feel. Her mother added her own message beneath it, and in hindsight, it reads almost like a philosophy she was quietly passing down. McCoy herself admitted that revisiting all of this now changes the way she experiences it. Time turns handwritten encouragement into something heavier, something almost sacred. What I didn't expect was the emotional honesty in how she reflected on loss itself. She acknowledged how many people don't get enough time with their parents, or never get the chance at all. And there's a raw frustration in her words, like she's sitting with a truth no one can really solve. What the F can we do? Doesn't sound polished. It sounds real, like grief refusing to stay neatly expressed. She closed her message by offering the notes outward, almost like sharing inheritance in emotional form, hoping her mother's words might reach someone else who needed them that day. That idea, to me, is what transforms the post from personal memory into collective comfort. Support quickly poured in from colleagues in the soap world, including Tamara Braun, who sent love, and Rick Hurst, who responded with simple heart emojis that said more than words probably could. And what stayed with me most is how the comments section became its own quiet memorial space. People sharing stories of loss, memory, and survival. Fans talked about missing their mothers, about holding on to small traces of them, about grief that doesn't really disappear, but reshapes itself over time. One message described the notes as letter hugs, which feels like the most accurate way to summarize what those pieces of paper represent. In the end, I think this moment isn't just about grief or nostalgia. It's about how love survives in fragments, folded notes, saved words, and the strange way memory becomes something you can physically hold long after the person is gone. I think sometimes the most entertaining part of being a longtime soap viewer is how easily my mind starts blending different fictional worlds together. And to me, this recent moment feels like one of those rare situations where reality and imagination almost shake hands. I was looking at the idea of Jason Morgan from General Hospital colliding, at least in spirit, with the infamous masked figure from horror history, Jason Voorhees of Friday the 13th fame. And I didn't realize how naturally the comparison would form in my head until I started thinking about it more deeply. Jason Voorhees, as the legend goes, is this unstoppable force tied to Camp Crystal Lake, an entity shaped by tragedy, revenge, and an endless cycle of returning no matter how impossible it seems. In contrast, Jason Morgan is built from the world of daytime drama survival, someone constantly rewritten by fate, identity shifts, captivity arcs, and the classic soap opera ability to come back when no one expects it. And I think that's where the fun overlap begins. Both characters exist in that strange space where death is never really permanent, just a pause before the next dramatic return. I was also thinking about the visual symbolism that connects them in a loose, almost accidental way. Jason Voorhees with his iconic mask, and Jason Morgan with his own masked phase during his captivity storyline on General Hospital. A moment that fans still remember as one of those intense, identity-driven twists. It's not the same narrative universe, of course, but I didn't realize how easily my brain started linking those images anyway. Then there's the added layer of the twin confusion era in the soap, when Jason Morgan's identity storylines spiraled into revelations involving Drew Kane and long-lost connections that kept the audience constantly guessing. To me, that already felt like a soap opera version of horror logic. Characters returning, identities shifting, truths bending depending on the next twist. So when I saw Steve Burton at NostalgiaCon Dallas alongside Kane Hodder, the actor famously associated with bringing Jason Voorhees to life, I couldn't help but imagine the playful collision of these two worlds. It wasn't just a photo opportunity. It felt like a symbolic what-if moment. Jason versus Jason. Stone Cold versus the unstoppable slasher icon. And I think that's why Steve Burton's own post asking who would win hit so well with fans. It turns nostalgia into a kind of imaginative playground. To me, it's less about who would win in a fight and more about what each Jason represents in their own genre. One is rooted in emotional survival, memory loss, and redemption arcs. The other is pure mythic horror, an almost supernatural force of consequence that never really stops moving. And maybe that's why the idea sticks, because when you place them side by side, I didn't realize how similar they feel in concept, even though they come from completely different storytelling worlds. In the end, it's one of those crossover daydreams that doesn't need resolution. It just exists to make fans smile, speculate, and imagine what happens when soap opera drama and horror legend briefly share the same spotlight. I think what's unfolding in Port Charles feels less like a calm week and more like everything tightening at once, as if every secret that's been sitting in the shadows is finally starting to breathe. To me, the night at the Savoy looked like the one brief moment of normalcy. People gathering, watching Gio's friend Michael James Scott perform, almost like the town was pretending things weren't already slipping out of control. But that illusion didn't last long. I didn't realize how quickly things would escalate between Carly, Jack, and Valentine until that confrontation turned into something far more dangerous. What started as tension became a full-blown power struggle, and Valentine walking away with blackmail over Jack really shifted the balance in a way that feels like it's going to echo for a long time. At the same time, Joss being trapped with Nathan in the same place where Anna was once held captive didn't feel random at all. It felt intentional, like history repeating itself in a more calculated, unsettling way. I keep thinking about how these situations always circle back to old wounds in Port Charles. Meanwhile, Sonny's instincts are doing what they always do, pushing him to test people instead of trusting them. Between Ethan and Rick, the truth didn't stay hidden for long. Once D.A. Turner exposed Rick's lie, it almost felt inevitable that Sonny would see it as another betrayal layered on top of old ones. I think what stood out most was how quickly suspicion turned into certainty in his mind. Over at the hospital and beyond, Elizabeth's decision to trust Rick enough to travel with him raised immediate concern, especially with Laura stepping in. It didn't feel like casual caution. It felt like the mayor sensing a pattern she's seen before, where protection and danger start blending together too easily. And then there's Ethan. I don't think I fully understood the weight of his reaction until everything about Delilah and baby Phoebe came out. The way he processed it, meeting Phoebe, hearing the story from Brooklyn and Chase, then quietly burning Delilah's picture, felt like someone trying to erase a past that refuses to stay buried. I was wondering if this is less about secrecy and more about survival for him, like he believes the truth itself could destroy what's left of stability. Elsewhere, Curtis and Jordan's conversation about the accident theory showed how even logic can split people apart. Curtis is piecing things together, but Jordan isn't convinced, and that gap between them feels important, like the truth is sitting right in the middle, but no one can fully step into it yet. Sonny's world, though, feels like it's collapsing into confrontation. Rick and Ava working behind closed doors, Ethan pulling a gun, and accusations flying. It all builds towards something explosive. When Sonny and Ethan interrupt that meeting, it stops being about suspicion and becomes outright exposure. I think that moment says everything about how far trust has eroded. And then the reveal around Rocco changes everything again. Elizabeth and Dante realizing he may have been the one who shot Cullum, with Jason covering it up, adds a layer of moral conflict that feels heavier than the usual Port Charles chaos. It's not just about what happened, it's about why it was hidden. Even Lulu's refusal to send Rocco away, despite Cassius pushing for it, shows how every protective instinct in this town is colliding with consequences no one fully understands yet. By the time Valentine and Jack end up in a physical fight at Drew's house, with Nina stepping in using the very drug meant for Drew, it feels like every storyline is converging into one simple idea. Control is slipping from everyone's hands. I think the most unsettling part is how calculated it all still feels, like each move is part of a larger plan no one can fully see yet. And to me, that's what makes this stretch in Port Charles feel so charged. Every character thinks they're acting with purpose, but the consequences are starting to move faster than their intentions.